it's funny. We love Joe Rogan,
right?
And he's got an assistant, and he calls him Young Jamie. And
so this is your young Jamie?
No, this is my dumb Jamie.
We were saying earlier, like, you can't give me like hard things to look up or anything like that because I'm not.
Because I was like, oh, can we ask you to look things up?
Right.
But okay, so we started with Monument Terrace. That's kind of what brought us together in the first place.
Yeah.
And paying homage to Steve Bozeman, who I feel like is the reason that I'm kind of doing what I'm doing.
Right.
And because I never really wanted to be in front of the camera. I felt like I've had some good ideas that I could make, but I always wanted to produce it and not be in front of it. But he's been pushing me out in front of the camera lately, and I feel obligated to kind of step up and take some of that responsibility on, even though it kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. It's nice to put a little weight back on my shoulders and know that I could be using some of this energy for good.
But that's also where we get our biggest growth, right? When we're uncomfortable.
Yeah,
when we're comfortable, we don't grow much, right? It's when we're uncomfortable that's where we get the growth, right?
Yeah.
So
John and I were talking about that after you left. We were saying how it's just about life is kind of figuring out how to find pleasure in the discomfort. Because once you can do that, everything else is pretty easy.
Absolutely.
In comparison. But so I never really got into like what you do for mental health, like outside of taking the prescribed things that the department would like you to do. What do you do, and what have you found that works?
Yeah, so the first easy answer to that is not enough, right? I think we talked a little bit earlier when we were talking about, we've all got demons, right? And recognizing that we have them first is the first part. Realizing that it's okay to have them, and that you've got to do something to try and harness them, capture them, address them, deal with them, however you look at it. I'll tell you, one of my biggest faults is I don't get enough sleep, right? Like, that's just straight up. I don't sleep nearly enough, and that leads to a lot of other things, And I was talking to you earlier when we talked about Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, right? And he's actually working on, he said when I heard him talk the other day, his next book is about sleep and how it really impacts everything, right? And how, if you're not getting enough sleep and the right type of sleep, that they've shown studies that folks that are suicidal, oftentimes one of the big indicators they don't get enough sleep, right? I'm not saying I'm suicidal, right? I'm good right now, but and how that can impact everything, and sleep definitely impacts your mental health, right? And you've seen studies, I'm sure, before that show if you're up X number of hours, it's the equivalent of having a BAC of 0.08 or 0.10, and I think a lot of times our officers, not all the time, right? But I remember a case. I was in our criminal investigations division, CID. I was a lieutenant, or maybe a captain at the time, and we had a case. It was a drive-by shooting, odd for our area, but long and short, two guys sitting in a car were the targets of this shooting. They're parked in a car on the side of the road in a residential neighborhood, and two large SUVs pull up, and these SUVs are both loaded down with probably 6 to 7 people in each of them, and everybody on the passenger side goes out the window with a weapon. Everybody on the driver's side comes up over the top of the vehicle with a weapon, everything from handguns to AKs and everything in between, and they just riddle this car with bullets. And we were out on that case for about 54 hours straight, right? And I got to tell you, towards the end of that, you could have given me a math problem of like, what's 4 plus 3, and I would have struggled to do it, right? Just because your mind is just playing tricks on you, and you're starting to hallucinate, and you're starting to, and so we shut it down at that point and got some people some sleep, obviously, but we had 11 different people that we were looking for, and we needed to track them down quickly, and we ultimately solved the case and charged, I think, 9 of the 11 with murder, a concert action kind of thing. We could never prove which bullet killed the one guy, and the other guy was seriously wounded. But I say all that story to say, that how important sleep is, right? And that's an area I struggle with. What I'd like to do to try and deal with it, I like to exercise. I don't find nearly enough time to do it, unfortunately. I try and force myself up early in the mornings, because if I don't do it with my schedule first thing when I get up, I sometimes just don't get to it, right?
Yeah.
A hobby I would like to have time to do, and I may need your expertise sometimes. I love to photograph things, right? I love to do photography of mostly nature, right? And just like, different things I see in it, not people or anything like that, but just, trying to capture the right framing of you know, something in the foreground, something in the background, something nice, you know, and drive my wife crazy with it because she's like, we were on vacation a month ago or so, and I'm stopping every 3 seconds, like, oh, that's a great picture, I'm gonna get that. She's like, come on, let's go, you know. But yeah, I enjoy doing that. I've got a little drone. I like to fly around a little bit, do some photography with that a little bit,
Nice.
and you know, just time for me is the biggest challenge to do those things.
Right.
So I fail miserably a lot of times in self-care. I encourage my folks to do a lot of it and make sure they are as much as I can encourage them. And I need, honestly, to set a better example with that, because I sometimes prioritize work too much and spend too much time at work. And it's a work in progress, definitely,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Sometimes I think where I'd be most useful is for people to bring me in, and I'd be like the self-care regulator. Like, are you doing enough?
Yeah.
And helping you prioritize your time and getting it figured out. Because for me, that's where it all starts, right? Like, I know after, you know, taking my hiatus into nature, like what my recipe is for success. And it's so important for me to be on level, so that way I can go out and make good decisions and put myself in a position to help others. And because the better off I am at the core, like, I'm so much more useful. And I think we all can benefit from that.
No doubt, and it's so important, the self-care piece. And you know, whatever it is, some folks, right, it's lifting weights, some it's running, some it's painting or reading a book or doing, you know, whatever it may be. And yeah, I really enjoy reading. I got a bookshelf full of books that I've read probably 2% of what's on it, you know. And you know, I just need to find more time to read. I think I shared earlier with Goggins book, David Goggins book I read recently, Can't Hurt Me, and incredible book, and a lot of stuff I took out of there. And you know, and interestingly, he, at the end of that book, I won't spoil it for you, but you know, he now spends like hours a day stretching, because for years he just abused his body and he didn't do that, and he found that he really needs that, and that really helps him. And you know, so for him it's stretching, for somebody else it could be meditation, it could be
It's a combination of
playing
all
an
that.
instrument, it could be a variety of things.
Yeah.
You know? I keep telling myself I'm gonna buy a drum set, right? So played the drums in high school, I loved it, right? And I keep telling myself I'm gonna do that at one point, and just
Something else to piss off the wife?
yeah, drive her crazy, I'm sure. She'll probably put me out in the garage or in the basement or somewhere, but you know, that's all right. That's all right. So.
Well, I have a few cameras. I'd love to. Do you have a camera, or what do you use?
No, I mean, I use an iPhone is what I use, man. Like I'm not even to the point to
Well,
have a camera.
I got a loaner. I could.
All right,
I could teach you how to do it.
I might
That'd be fun.
have to take you up on that, man. It's
Yeah.
yeah. I know not anything about scale or foreground or back. Hey, that looks good to me, and I take a picture, right? And but it's something that, you know, down the road I'd love to get into, and you know, kind of just something that takes you away from the day to day, you know, and enjoy. I mean, there's so much, especially in this city and around this area. There's so
Oh, it's so pretty.
so many beautiful things. I flew a drone. I was down at I'm sure you've been to Blackwater Creek entrance at Holland's Mill, where the dam is there.
Yes.
All right, so
Right where the water's coming over.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Water's coming over. And I was down there one time with my youngest son, just flying the drone around. He was taking turns with me, and we're down there, and I was just flying across the dam, trying to get, you know, some perspective coming up and over it and all that video. And this heron flies in, right, and lands, and I end up flying this drone like probably a meter away from this heron, getting this awesome video of it, right? It was just nature, right? It's just beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just something neat, you know, something I'd like to have more time to do eventually and spend some time on that. But work in progress, man, definitely.
Well, I'll try to keep you. I'll bug you to go
All right.
do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you'll
Love
just
it.
appease me, and then it'll benefit both of us.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely, yeah.
Because that's all. I love doing that. Just going out and taking pictures and seeing what we find.
Yeah.
And especially if I could teach you how to use the camera, cause
Oh, absolutely.
that'd be awesome.
No, it would. Yeah.
But it is though. It's
Challenging
it's a shit job. I mean, it's I shouldn't say that.
No,
But from my
get it.
perspective, watching my dad do it, seeing my brother do it now, like it makes me not want to do it. It's the only reason I haven't done it.
Right.
I mean, outside of the fact that I'm not sure I would pass everything. I've had an interesting life, but I think I would be good at it. But the thing that stops me is like I don't feel like I would be able to. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I just feel like I'm lacking the tools or the issues that are in the system now, or like I know too much. I'm kind of jaded.
Yeah. No, it's a tough job, right? And it's a job that, I mean, again, we talked earlier. the analogies are, again, not the same. I don't ever want folks to think, as I told you before, that I'm comparing what I do as a police officer to what you have done as a member of our military, right? Very different. And my hat's off and all the respect to you and other folks that have served in the military, because I don't know that I could do that, right? But the analogy, I think, that's similar in both military service and law enforcement service is that it changes who you are, man. Like, it really does, and sometimes that's for the good, and sometimes it's not. And it changes your perspective on life. It changes how you view situations. How you and I go into a room in an unknown environment is very different than how someone who's not served in the military or in law enforcement, right? I talked to you earlier about Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, right, and what he talks about, and his analogy, and I'm sure you've heard this being in the military, he talks about sheep and sheepdog, right, and the wolf, right, and a lot of people are just they're oblivious to their surroundings, right, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? They probably live a much more peaceful life than folks like you and I do, right? But the job changes you, right? It jades you certainly, and the mental piece of it. You carry a lot of burdens with you, I think, coming through this job. A lot of information that you can't share with people in many cases, right? And it's hard for people who haven't been military or law enforcement to kind of understand your perspective and your outlook on life. And our goal is, as we talk about mental health of our officers, is to try and get them successfully through a career, but also to try and get them beyond that career, right? And so that they're not taking the national average of 5 to 7 years after you retire as a cop, you're dead, right? We want you to live a long, long life and be healthy and not be taking a ton of emotional baggage with you. And I
remember you saying that earlier. Is that number, is it so fast because of suicide, or?
That's part of it, just health, right? Most of our folks are working shift work, right? They're rotating. So in Lynchburg, they work 12-hour shifts, and they rotate from nights to days every 6 weeks, right? Our guys seem to like that. We actually tried to extend that a few years back and make it a longer rotation. Because from a health standpoint, that's better. But they love the 6 weeks, right? Because about the time they're sick of working daylight and the headaches they deal there, they go to nights. About the time they're sick of doing that, they're back on days. And but that shift work is tough, right? And it's tough on the body, especially the older you get. A lot of our folks are not eating well, right? Because they're grabbing something real quick because they're running from call to call, so they're stopping in fast food and they're just down in that, right? And they're not always taking care of their body as well as they should in terms of exercise and things like that. And then you add just the stress that you deal with that builds up over time. And we talked earlier about PTSD, right? It certainly could be one huge event, right? One big battle in a war, or one big officer-involved shooting or something like that. But more commonly, at least in my line of work, it's that cumulative stress over a career, right, that just builds on you. It's seeing, the young child that's sexually abused by a family member, right? It's seeing the woman that's run over by a car and mangled in the middle of the road. It's seeing all these other horrible things that, short of military folks, most human beings don't ever see that, right? And I think I shared with you earlier, in a 20-year career, the study showed that in a 20-year career, a police officer is going to see or be exposed to about 700 critical incidents, right? And the average non-military, non-law enforcement citizen is going to see 2 in 20 years, right? And we normalize it, right? In law enforcement, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, how do we deal with it? We use humor a lot, right?
Yeah.
And people think we're sick, sadistic
We have a
people.
dark humor.
But we have a dark humor because that's a coping mechanism, right? For dealing with seeing things that human beings should see. And I remember really young in my career, a guy I went through the academy with, actually, we were overlapping shifts. Night shift worked until 1 in the morning, midnight shift came out at 11, so we had about a 2-hour overlap. And got in service one day, and he's chasing a car that had been involved in a hit and run, and it goes across the John Lynch Bridge over into Amherst County, and there's a real sharp left-hand curve there, and the vehicle loses control. He's DUI, and he ends up rolling the vehicle. He gets partially ejected. He's not wearing a seatbelt, and as the vehicle's rolling, he's partway out the window, and he gets decapitated, right? And literally this guy's head is laying, 30 yards from his body in the car, and you shouldn't see that stuff, right? That's not normal, but you have to see with it. Not only you have to see it, you have to deal with it. You have to process a crime scene. You have to go notify a family member. You have to do all these things, and those things over time, Death notifications like may not seem like a real big deal, but like I can tell you, I remember the first one I did like it was yesterday, right? Young kid, about 16 years old. He was coming home, driving 501 from like Big Island back to Lynchburg. Those kind of twisty, windy roads through the mountain there. He's running late for his curfew, so he's trying to get home. He's going too fast. He goes off the road and loses control and dies. And happened in Bedford County. They call us and say, hey, can you do a death notification? And I remember going to the house. It's about 1 in the morning, and knocking on the door, and lights coming on. I remember like it was yesterday. Husband, wife, which are father and mother of this young man, and this young man's sister coming to the door at 1 o'clock. And there's no real easy way to tell people that. And just watching this grown man and grown woman just break down. I mean, completely break down, right? And you don't know what I was 22 years old, right? What life experience did I have to tell people that were older than me that their son, who's just a couple years younger than me, just died, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that, right, like it was yesterday. And that's the kind of stress that our folks go through. And they, unfortunately, a lot of times, at least I'll speak for myself. When I started, and I think I said earlier, the age was, and I think you had a similar experience you mentioned in the Corps, which was like, suck it up, don't show any weakness. You got to be strong and show people you can do it, and they can count on you, they can depend on you, right? And there's a lot of that stuff that is emotional baggage you carry with you if you don't deal with it, right? And I can tell you, I have a lot of that I definitely didn't deal with early in my career that definitely impacts me to this day, right? If I'm being straight, and and that's what we're trying to do with our younger officers, is create an environment where they have access to counselors, they have access to a department psychologist. We actually mandate that they go to a department psychologist once a year to just talk through the stuff they deal with, right?
Now, like, there's a point in your life where you see behind the curtain,
yeah,
so to speak, and then after that, it's never the same.
No, it really isn't. And it's funny you say that. I was over in Israel about 2 months ago, part of a fellowship I'm involved with. That's another episode maybe, but over there with a group of people that are intentionally from all very different walks of life, right? Like I'm the only cop right in this group, and so we're over there. There's a group of about 25 of us all total between the fellows in this fellowship, as well as some of the moderators and such, and we go to this market right in Jerusalem, and I was already a little hesitant, very honestly, going over to Israel, because things are not terribly stable over there, and they've gotten worse since actually in the last few months. And we're in this market, this open air market, right? And it's this historical market, and we had one guy assigned to us is a security detail, which I was grateful for, right? He was a former IDF Special Forces guy who does private contracting now on the side, and but he's like one dude, right, for 25 people, and grateful for him. He's armed because I'm not at the time, right? But you made me think about that when you said going into a restaurant, people seem different. Like, I was very uncomfortable in that market, right? Because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people around, and there's just so much going on, right? And I don't have anything there to defend myself with, right? And I'm relying on this one dude who I just met, who's a pretty squared away dude, right? But he's one dude, and I mean, to the point, very honestly, where when I got back onto the tour bus that we were using to get around, it was just kind of like, I needed a minute, right? Because it was just very overwhelming, and it was just being out of my comfort zone, right? And just not knowing what was going on and where it was coming from, and being in a very unfamiliar environment where that is a conflict that's been going on over there for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
And, just not knowing. And while we were there, not close to us, so I'm not trying to make this out to be anything it was, but not far from us, miles away, they had the IDF go into a refugee camp, right? And they ended up shooting and killing, 10 Palestinians, right? And then the next, day, the response is a young Palestinian comes into the Jerusalem and starts shooting people, right? And we were in the West Bank for a period of that time, and so it was just a very unique experience, and I was grateful for it. It gives me appreciation for what we have here in America. Again, not a perfect country like we said before, but still by far the best country in the world, and we have freedoms that folks like you have fought to maintain, right? And we try to, at the local level, right, uphold that, and it's certainly gave me some perspective, but definitely, we look through a different lens, right? And it's hard for some folks to see sometimes who haven't had that experience. So.
Do you ever feel that way around here? Like, I know growing up with my dad, we were always very cautious about who knew where we lived, and I was made very aware at a young age that I had to watch my back because my dad did a certain job, and there was people in the community that would want to maybe hurt him and us to get back at him for some of the things that he's done. And so it was like, even as a child, I was hyper aware because this big, strong man was scared or worried that something would happen to us, and it was very clear. So do you ever feel that way around here in your own community?
You know, good question. I'd say less now, more than when I was out doing the job, right? I mean, most of my job is in an office, in meetings, out in the community doing things, not enforcement, right? And so some of that, very bluntly, not good, is some complacency, right? But yes, at the same time, in that, you know, the story I'll share with you, this was many, many years ago. My wife and I, my two boys who are much younger, they're much older now, but they might have been, I don't know, 8 and 10 or something like that. We go to a restaurant to eat in the city here, and this woman walks up as our waitress. As soon as she walks up, I'm like, not good, right? And my wife can see what's going on, and she immediately comes up and looks me dead in the eye and says, "Hi, Officer Zuidema." I'm in plain clothes, right? And with my wife, "How are you and your family doing today?" Well, I'd arrested her son and her daughter and locked them up and put them away, as well as her husband at one point, right? And so I immediately just told my wife, "Grab the kids, we're out of here," right? I'm not staying, right? I'm just not, a million thoughts going through my mind. But yeah, I mean, I think you know, Lynchburg's a safe community. It really is, by and large. And you know, we've not seen any you know, direct attacks on law enforcement here, thank God, right? But at the same time, our folks got to be prepared for that, because you just don't know. We live in such a different world nowadays, and you know, I'm definitely cautious, right? And in this role, as small as the community is, I mean, it's not small, but it's not big either. It's not a huge, it's not New York City or DC or something like that. You know, you become well recognized, right, in this role, and you also, with a last name like mine, right? It's not like I'm Smith or, you know, or Jones or Thomas, right? And you know, my kids deal with that some, right? Like, you know, being the chief's kid, right? And with a last name like that, you kind of stand out. So yeah, they've learned kind of, I think, like you learned, right, growing up, that it's different. And you know, you got to be cautious, but you can't be paranoid, right? You got to still live your life, but you just got to be smart about where you go, what you do, and you know, have a means to defend yourself and have a plan, right? Because you know, when the stuff hits the fan, you got to get off the X, right? And folks that are around you, your loved ones, need to understand that too, right? I'm not out there to be a hero when I'm in the off-duty capacity, but I'm certainly going to have a means to protect my family and myself. You know? And so
that's my biggest thing is I carry, and it's not necessarily for me, because I feel like I can get out of almost any situation, right? I can become a real small target quick, but you know, I can't stand by if someone's being taken advantage of or hurt or so, and I just know that about myself. Like, I'm gonna step in.
You're not gonna be a bystander. No,
so,
it's not in your DNA or my DNA.
And
right?
she knows that now too, which is like, it's, you know, it scares her, but it also makes her feel safe. But it
makes me worse. I would just walk around just.
You know, we're not the fire department. People don't call us, and they're really happy to see us a lot of times, right? And I love our fire department friends. I also like giving them a hard time, right? But you know, we're often dealing with folks on their worst day, right? People don't call 911 for the police because they just want to see how our day is going, right? They call because there's some type of crisis or tragedy or something horribly wrong that's going on that they feel that they need someone to come help them with, right? So we're interacting with people on their worst day, and you know, when you constantly interact with folks on their worst day, it's very easy for you to become cynical, right? Because you're just seeing the worst of society, right? And not often are we seeing all the great things that people are involved in or doing, because they don't call us when times are good. And you know, so that's that cumulative stress that continues to build. And you know, we try and engage our community as many positive things as we can through, you know, different types of partnerships, and you know, whether it's giving away bikes to kids that earn them in schools with a bike program that we do with a community group, or whether it's, you know, going to different events that, you know, our folks can show up kind of and be officer friendly too. But you know, and most cops are just the opposite. We don't trust anybody until you earn our trust, right? And that's a tough way to live life, right? And you find cops who, tend to lose relationships the longer they're in this profession with folks who aren't cops, right? Because you don't understand me. I need to hang out with people that do understand me, and that's not healthy either, right? We need to have folks that are in our lives that help ground us a little bit, that are not cops, right? That can help us see through a different lens, right? And so it's a challenge to keep people. So that's why we try and focus a lot on the mental health thing to redirect folks back to being as normal as you can be in this line of work, which is hard sometimes.
Yeah, especially when I feel like the some of the neighborhoods that are problematic start to look at you a certain way. Like I know, I cruise around every day in my little '88 Ford pickup, and I'm playing music and I'm smiling, and everyone pretty much waves or compliments my truck. But as we were driving around in the squad car, you're noticing young children just glaring at you. Yeah. Like they instinctually know to hate you. Yeah. To fear you. Yeah. And to, want to run or evade almost immediately. Like you can feel it. You can see it on their face. And it's like, how do we break that? Yeah. So it's a learned behavior, I will tell you that, right? You don't come out of the womb saying cops are bad, right? Right. You're socialized into that. And the story I'll share with you, 1997, brand new cop. I'm maybe like, 6 months on the job, right? And so I am like, hey, this is the greatest job in the world. Everybody loves us, right? This is my mentality, my mindset, and I'm officer happy, right? And so I'm driving around waving to everybody, and it's about 7 in the morning, just about ready to get off shift. I was working overnight, 11 to 8, and I drive by this little kid standing, waiting for a school bus, right? He's got his little backpack on, his little, lunch pack, whatever he's got with him, and a mother standing there. And as I'm driving by, I slow down, right? And I make a very intentional wave. Hey, how you doing, buddy? And this little kid, who's probably 7, maybe, immediately is like this to me, right? And I am like, I'm in shock, right? Because I'm like, he's a little kid. Like, growing up as a little kid, I saw a police officer. I was like, oh, wow, right? Mm-hmm. And the kid flips me off, and I'm like in shock. So I slow down, and I look back, and I'm waiting for Mom to grab a hold of this kid and, give him a spanking or give him a talking to or something, right? And I look over at Mom, and she is laughing and pointing at me, and she is just carrying on laughing, thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And, like, kind of hit me, right? Like, okay. Like, that kid doesn't know any better, right? He just thinks that's what you do to the police when they come by, right? And so we got a long ways to go there, and you got to break that cycle, right? There's a lot of cycles like that. I met a woman, this is late 90s, was on a call for something. Woman holding a little baby, right? And baby's maybe less than a year old. And I said, hey, she's a fairly young woman. I said, ma'am, how old's your baby? She says, oh, honey, this ain't my baby. It's my grandbaby. Kind of took me back a little bit. I said, if you don't mind me asking, I know no man should ever ask a woman this, but how old are you? And she said, I'm 28. Had my baby when I was 14. She had her baby when she was 14, right? And did not see, I was proud of that, right? And to me, I was trying to process a 28-year-old grandmother, right? And but that was normal, right? That's what had just happened for probably multiple generations, right, with her family. And, I can tell you, at 14, I was not ready to have a child, right? Heck, I had my first child at 28, and I don't know that I was quite ready to do that. And, but those are the types of cycles and, the things you see. And, it's different, right? Riding around in your pickup truck and versus riding around, there's just a stigma that comes because you sitting in a police car, short of you being in the back in handcuffs, you were a part of them, right? Don't know who you are or what you're doing, but you're with them, right? And there's an association that's automatically, and a lot of labels and a lot of other things, and so it's interesting, right? It was really interesting walking around with the cop because, Collins and we're acting like buddies. Yeah, we're already kind of cool. We have this thing in common. He knows I'm military, whatever. But I had to go to court with him first, so I started off going to court. And everybody's in there, and they're just trying to figure out who the fuck this dude with neck tattoos that's getting treated special is. Right. And it was the same thing when we were in the car. Oh, yeah. So I walk in, and the there was another officer there, and he's like, "Oh, you're the ride along. I wondered, who the guy with tattoos was." And I was like, Ryan said I could join the force with these tattoos, and he's like, Ryan, who's Ryan? and Collins was like, Chief. He's like, oh, and then he like laughed, like it was funny, like there's no way it would even still be possible.
Or how does this guy know him and call him Ryan with all these neck tattoos?
Yeah,
right?
true.
Yeah. No, and that, I think that just goes to a lot of the stereotypes everybody has for people in life, right? I think we threshold judge people, right? Part of that, law enforcement and the military, you have to do it because it's a survival.
Profiling
is a survival mechanism. I have got to, when I walk in the door or you walk in the door, I am going to give you a threshold judgment right out of the gate because I'm assessing, are you a threat or not a threat, right?
Yeah.
That's survival, right? And in military and law enforcement, you do not survive if you don't do some of that, right? But with that comes a lot of things, right? And we teach a class on fair and impartial policing, and one of the things we talk about is implicit bias, right? And we all have them. You have them, I have them, everybody has them, right? It's based on how we were raised and what we were taught or not taught, right? And one of the scenarios we go through is like, okay, if we tell you there's a person in a park with a gun and you show up at the park and you don't have any other description, and there's a 78-year-old woman sitting over there and there's a 21-year-old dude sitting there, who's got the gun? 95+% of the time.
The grandma.
Yeah, right. It's a 21-year-old dude, right?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is, even in making those assessments and using your implicit bias to make that decision, that could get you killed, right? Because it could be 95-year-old woman, right, who's got a mental health issue, who's got a gun.
She's ready to go.
Yeah, you don't know. So, but we make a lot of judgments and stereotypes. Again, some of the threshold judgment stuff is a survival mechanism, but there's just a lot of stereotypes that come along when somebody sees a dude that's tatted up on his neck and his arms, right? And when I started, like tattoos were like, if they were visible anywhere, it was like a big no-no, right? Mm-hmm. And then we've progressed obviously to a point now where it's like, okay, certainly we can't have tattoos that are offensive related to racial things or any type of religious things or anything like that. But if you're tatted up, you're tatted up. I mean, I've got guys that are sleeved, right, that work for me, and that, some folks relate to them better than they relate to me, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, we got to be careful how we do some of that, certainly, because, we got to make sure we're treating people fairly. But, at the same time, we also don't want to just jump to conclusions based on somebody's appearance, right? We want to focus on behavior and not necessarily appearance. So it's...
it's funny, when I made the decision to do all these tattoos, it was... so that way I could never fit back into society. Right. I thought that as long as I had these tattoos, I would always be kind of shunned.
Now here you are, it's mainstream, right? Not everybody's.
It's working out. It's funny how that works out.
No, it definitely comes around, right? Definitely.
Did you guys get a lot of kickback for the George Floyd stuff, Black Lives Matters and all that?
Yeah. So. 2020, right? It was just a perfect storm of everything, right? COVID's hitting, George Floyd happens, and just state it so people know, like, that was absolutely wrong, right? Like, that was murder, and those cops were way out of line. That should have never happened, right? And they don't deserve to wear a badge, right? Those of us who wear a badge, and I told you this earlier, the only people in America that hate bad cops more than the general public is the good cops, right? Because, there's actions that are, whether it's George Floyd or back in the 90s, Rodney King, that makes everybody's job who wears a badge very, very difficult. But with that being said, so we saw riots here in Lynchburg, right? Never seen anything like that in my career here, right? Seen that certainly happen in other places, but a lot of times you hear the old adage, well, that won't happen here, right? And well, it did. We had a incident at 5th and Federal. Used to be a restaurant there called 5th and Federal, and there were folks that were there peacefully protesting, and it turned ugly at one point. I won't get into all the politics that are behind it, because there's politics, and a good police chief never gets into politics. So, but in the middle of all this, there's folks that are protesting there based on some social media stuff that was put out related to that business, and we ended up finding a lot of this out later and afterwards. But there's a gentleman in the crowd that's basically like, hey man, this isn't popping off the way it should be, so I'm going to get it going. So he takes an M80 out of his pocket, he lights it, and he throws it in the middle of the crowd, right? And you can imagine. There's several hundred people there already. Tensions are already high. there are folks on the property, Fifth and Federal, that are trying to protect the property. They're armed, right? There's folks in the crowd that are not happy that they're there and that they're armed, and there's just this tension there. And so when this M80 goes off, the people in the crowd think that the people at the business are shooting at them. The people at the business don't know if somebody's shooting at them. How nothing else happened out of that amazes me to this day. But what did happen out of that is folks in the crowd that started destroying that building. Right, they were picking up rocks everywhere they could find them, pulling up bricks out of the roadway, knocking off any chunk anything they could, and damaging the building there. A building next door got damaged significantly, had a bunch of old classic cars in it that got destroyed, and it was chaos. It was a riot. And a lot of times people like to talk about, well, there was civil unrest or there were protesting. No, I support protesting, right? That's your and my God-given right to do as long as we do it peacefully, right? We're not breaking the law. But in this situation, it was a riot. It was out of control. We had I think, don't quote me on it, I think 3 police cars like significantly damaged. When I say that, I mean all the windows busted out of them, people stomping on the hoods, the roofs, ripping gear and equipment out of them and taking that. And, we're trying to make sure we're getting any type of weapons that may be in there out of there so they can't, if they want to rip a computer out of there, like in that situation, have at it, right? Like we'll fix and replace that. But, and then, at one point we brought a piece of armor we had there. It's called a Bearcat. So it's equivalent to a smaller APC you'd see in the military, right? And it'll stop, up to 50 caliber rounds. And we had my team inside of that. And that thing got shot about 6 times, I think, while my folks were inside it with rifle rounds. And obviously it did its job and protected them. But, that was in Lynchburg, Virginia, right? When I tell people that story, they're like, what? And, we ended up eventually calling for a significant number of officers to come in that were off, as well as some assistance from the neighboring jurisdictions, and were able to restore order that night. Next night we had some more rioting taking place up near Miller Park, and we called in a significant number of resources from neighboring jurisdictions, state police, to be able to sustain that, because you're not just dealing with that, you're still dealing with all the 911 calls that you normally get and everything else that's going on. And we actually put a curfew in place, which to my knowledge is the first time we'd ever put a curfew in place in the city. That's something that the former city manager and I spoke at length about. And I told her, I said, the only way I can determine the bad guys from the good guys, right, is to put a curfew in place. And if you're out after that curfew, I'm not saying you're a bad person, but it gives us a reason to approach you and address you and figure out what's going on, right? And so we did that. That was met with varying levels of support from the community. Some that understood it and appreciated it, some that thought, we'd gone too far. Called the National Guard in. I took a lot of heat for that, but I was not going to have our community look like, and I won't name the communities, but there's others in this state, and there's certainly others around the country that sat back and watched these people burn their city down. Not on my watch, right? Not going to happen. And at the end of the day, if you want to fire me for taking that stance, then you fire me. But that was not going to happen on our watch. And so we brought the National Guard in. They came in town in Humvees and everything else. And I think it sent a very clear message to folks that, like, you know what? Not here. You want to do that stupid stuff? You craziness. You go somewhere else to do it, right? And
I've heard somebody speak about how you handled that time frame. I went down to Pappy's to get some cigars and or Paps. And mentioned that I would talk to you one day on this, and they said that you handled that situation really good. They were in there talking politics and stuff. Okay. But who do you answer to? Who's your boss?
So my boss is the city manager, and that's he is in essence the CEO for the city, right? And then he reports to city council, right? So he has 7 bosses that he answers to, and so yeah, my position is appointed, but I don't have any protections, right? So if tomorrow the city manager walks in and says, hey, I don't like that you're wearing a pink tie today, you're fired, then I'm fired, right? And I'm out. And so, and that's, you understand that when you take this job, but you've also got to be willing to lose your job tomorrow to make the right decision today, right? And I stand by every decision I made during that time. It upset some people. We had several people that were influential in the community that did not appreciate the approach we took, but at the end of the day, my job is really simple. It's to keep people safe, right? And I took steps and actions with the help of a lot of other folks and a lot of other agencies to keep our community safe, right? And after those 2 nights, we probably had between National Guard and law enforcement for the next 5 days, we probably had 300 people in the city ready to address and deal with anything that needed to be addressed and dealt with. And we left the curfew in place for, don't quote me on this, I think maybe 3 nights or so. It was very effective. It's so effective that we had protesters in the city second night or third night, don't quote me on that, it's kind of a blur, but the curfew was from 9 p.m. I think to 5 or 6 a.m. and they were in the city at 9, just prior to 9 p.m. They all packed up shop and moved down Ward's Road just outside the city and started protesting just outside the city, right? So, that to me told me that was effective, right?
Yeah.
Even the protesters knew, you can't be out after 9. So it was a challenging time for our folks. I had 3 officers go to the hospital with various injuries. Had one took a brick to his ankle. Nothing serious that caused them long-term effects, but I had another officer took a brick or chunk of concrete through a riot shield, and I'm sure probably used something similar in the military, exposed them. That's some really thick, like Lexan plastic, and literally sheared that thing off and hit him in the face, and gave him some stitches. And all things totaled, though, we had 3 folks with some minor injuries in the broad scheme of things, and the rest of my folks were safe. And we kind of established order very shortly thereafter, and I think very clearly told people what was going to be tolerated and what wasn't. And again, I will stand by letting folks protest all day long if they're doing it peacefully, right? And even if it's a message I don't like or agree with, right? Even if the message is we hate the cops, they're all criminals and everything else, hey, guess what? Part of our job is we protect folks so they can have freedom of speech, right? And whether we like the speech, whether it's directed against us or not, that's still our job. But there's also a very clear line between protesting and rioting, right? And protesting all day long, rioting I'm not going to deal with. We're not going to stand for that, and we're going to go in. And so what we did afterwards, this took several months, but through combing video and photographs and CCTV and social media, we ended up charging 30 some odd people with participating in that riot. We actually found the individual that dropped that M80. We charged him with inciting that riot, and got a confession from him, and charged a variety of other folks with offenses related to that riot again. And that took a period of probably 3 months, if not a little more. Riots were long done and over with, but I thought it was important that, again, not we just quell the riot, but we show the folks that were involved in that you're not going to do this stuff in our city, right? You want to act silly, you go somewhere else to do it, or you behave. And challenging time. I think we grew as a department. I think we learned a lot from it. The follow-up to that was we went out in the community with a series of what we call listening sessions, where they were just that. We hired a moderator to come in, and we went strategically into some of the African American communities and neighborhoods, to the rec centers there, and sat and listened to tell us what you think. Tell us what's going on. And we heard some tough things, I'll be honest with you. And we also heard some really good things too. And I remember an African American woman at Darrington who came to that event. It was our first one. And she talked about how she had 2 sons, one who's in prison, been in there for a while, another one who's potentially going back to prison. And she basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said, I'm hearing people say we don't want the police. I need you in our neighborhoods. We just need you to treat our young men with respect, right? I don't think that was unreasonable, right? And the other reality is the African American community here in Lynchburg, right? There's a lot of folks in that community that are still alive that were here in the 60s and 70s, right? And policing in the 60s and 70s towards the African American community was not good anywhere in this country, right? And what we got to recognize is that there are people that are still alive that went through that, and at the hands of people that wore this uniform, right? And they've told their sons and their grandsons and other folks. And so, we've got to understand that they look at through that lens. We've got to build that trust and keep working towards building that trust. So it was a challenging time, certainly. I'm grateful that none of our elected leaders at that time ever discussed defunding the police, which was very common around the country. I mean, if anything, we needed more money for more training, more people, more all this stuff. And I was grateful that I had a city council that said we're not going to entertain defunding. We're going to certainly stand by the police when they do right, and we're certainly going to ask questions when things don't go so right. And again, I think that's fair, right? We're human beings. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes, right?
Yeah, I worry about that with my brother. That something might happen to him because he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. My buddy Hale during during COVID, and he was shot at twice in his vehicle, just sitting there. The bullet got stopped by the cage right behind his head. Like that's the only thing that stopped him from just being shot and killed for being a cop.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? As we talked a little bit earlier about recruiting, right? And we're trying to get young men and women with the right heart and the right mind, right, to come into this line of work. And when they see things like that, like you're talking about with your buddy, right? It's like, for $50,000 a year?
Yeah,
like,
why would I?
Why would I do that, right? And and when I can go do 3 or 4 other jobs, get paid more money, have a better work schedule, less stress, right? And the last few years, after George Floyd and the police reform movement and all that, it really has challenged our recruitment efforts, right? Because it's we've in many circles been vilified, right? We've been made out to be the bad guys somehow, and again, doesn't mean there aren't cops that do bad things, right? There are, and we try and address and get rid of them as quick as we can, right? But to just take this blanket, and kind of throw it over to the whole profession and say you're all like,
that's really easy to do.
It is, right? And that's why we've got to build those relationships, because you can't. Not you can't. It's harder to throw stones when you know somebody on a first name basis, right? And it's again, it's sitting down with folks and helping them understand what we do and why we do it. Because where do most people get educated about police work, right? Movies, never even close to accurate. Social media.
I think lately news and just them seeing a constant reminder that cops are fucking up.
Right.
Because that's all that gets highlighted.
Yeah.
But that's all that gets highlighted for a reason, because that's what's sexy. That's what's going to get the views. Nobody gives a shit if a cop's giving bikes to kids down at the school.
Right.
They care if they're shooting them for no fucking reason, so they can say how shitty it is and defund the police and take all the weapons away. It's like
it's challenge, right? And it's one of the things we heard after George Floyd and police reform and defund was how the police have become too militarized, right? And I had a couple people ask me about that, like, why do you have all this stuff, right? Well, first, what is stuff, right? Like, tell me what you're talking about specifically, and I'll be able to answer that for you, right? But like, why do we have rifles? Because the bad guys have rifles, right? And a handgun, even in the hands of a very well-trained marksman, right, is not really accurate at 100 yards, right? Mm-hmm. But a rifle is, and we don't hopefully ever have to use those. But in the situations we do, I got to at least have the firepower that the bad guys have got, right? And why do you have an armored vehicle? Well, come to 5th and Federal, and I will show you, the glass in the front of this thing that was all shot up. Had that not been there, probably some of my cops would be dead, right? And probably some of the people that were shooting at my cops would be dead from us returning fire at them, right? So, those are things that it's just. People like to jump on this national narrative, right, of whatever this thing is without really understanding what we do here. Like, one of the things people came to me after the George Floyd situation is, there's this national narrative of these, they call it 8 can't wait, right? These 8 things that every police department needs to do. And so we had some local folks that came to me and were like, you need to do all these right now. You need to get body cameras. Like, we've had body cameras for like 4 years, right? Like, what I mean? It's just not even taking the time to really, but again, that drives home how important it is for us to explain to the community what we do, right? And that's another takeaway from this. We need to do a better job explaining to the community what we do, why we do it, so they understand that, we're not just, some dudes that decide to get together and put a police department together, right? We're a professional organization that follows a lot of industry standards to make sure that we're providing the highest level of professional law enforcement service we can, right? But we're still human beings, and we may screw up. And we'll be transparent when we do and tell you why and what happened, and just expect that you understand that, those things may happen from time to time. So,
is there a way that I can join my uncle? He went through the academy and became like a auxiliary.
Auxiliary, yeah.
What is that?
So we don't have an auxiliary program here. There's a lot of places that do, and they allow them to serve different functions and different roles, whether it be at events, helping out with events, or maybe traffic control at an event or something like that. We don't have that here. There's some liability issues that come along with that. In doing that, we are looking to do a part-time police officer program, but that's for basically retirees that have left that we want to hire back. We've talked about the auxiliary thing from time to time. Some of the challenge with that is, right, is like we might spend all this time and effort getting you trained up, and like you're like, yeah, appreciate it, this ain't for me, and I'm out of here, right? And so, whereas, with folks that we hire that are employees, there's a little more vested, interest in them staying because we're writing them a paycheck, versus just somebody that's like, hey, this is really cool and fun. I want to do this for a little while, right? And so, I'm always open to looking at things like that, but it's got to make sense first. That's all.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn how to navigate and figure out, how to get involved in some of these things, because there are a lot of veterans that I haven't found them all yet, but I know that there's people like me who are capable,
right,
who want to be a part of it, but maybe don't know how, or it's just, I'm interested to see how we can get involved and what we can do.
It's a great community, I mean, it's, and the veterans are a big part of that, right? I mean, it's knowing your story, that's why you're here, right? Like, you could be anywhere in the country you want to be, right?
Monument Terrace was, it was very attractive coming through. I was like, any town that, has put this much thought and effort into memorializing, the people that have fought and died from this area. And, it was that first, and then it was learning that all the wounded soldiers from the Civil War were sent here, and ultimately that's what saved Lynchburg from being burnt down like the rest of the towns in Virginia. And it just felt very serendipitous with, Steve being introduced to me through Mike, and Mike, who I served with, who I had, it kind of where this whole thing started. He was the very first interview I ever did. And I watched the video footage from time to time, and it's shit, right? The audio is even worse than today's, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, because I'm still lacking a lot of that core life experience that I've picked up from then till now, that I think gives me a unique perspective on just mental health. Like, my biggest fear. And I think this is, also why the suicide rate is so high, and why maybe people die so fast after they're done is, you give so much of yourself to this one thing, and when you don't have it, you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I was my exit from the Marine Corps was a little tumultuous, to say the least. I was a very angry young man with a lot of rage inside of me and confusion. And when I was asked to leave the Marine Corps, it broke my heart, and I was terrified to be by myself. I was afraid to have nothing. I was just kind of terrified of life. I didn't know how to do it, not being a Marine, not having my guys.
It's your identity, right?
And yeah, it was my ego. It was everything that I had become up until that point. And right around the time all of that was becoming a little bit too much, I tried to take my own life. But the way that I tried to do it was via cop at the time, because I didn't have any weapons at home. My weapons were in the armory. My roommate had one hunting rifle, and when he saw me acting out and getting drunk and kind of on the downward end of my spiral, he moved all the weapons out of the house. So long story short, I decided this was going to be the day, and I sent my goodbye text to my mom and my wife at the time, and my mom had called the local 911 after I'd hung up, and I was sitting there, and I had decided that I was going to take my own life with a knife, but then the cops showed up, and I was like, thank God, right? Because I didn't want to do it this way. So I saw 3 cops, and I was so drunk, they all were holding weapons, and I thought, they were lethal. So I attempted to lunge at them with the knife in hopes that they would shoot me, and they all had non-lethal. So I got tased by 2 different cops, and I took a 40 Mike riot round to my ribs, and I was sober fast, like right now. And I woke up in a hospital, and I was kind of off all my alcohol and antidepressants and pain pills that I was on at the time. Just a beautiful cocktail of nothingness.
Right.
And but the cop that I brought this whole thing up to say that the cop that came on the call, he knew who I was, and when they showed up with non-lethal and made that choice, even when I was coming at him with a knife, because there was definitely time for them to switch from non-lethal to lethal, and they didn't. And I owe a lot to those cops, and ever since then, I've always had a much higher appreciation for cops outside of my family connection.
Right.
So much so that I've wanted to be a cop from time to time, but the only thing that stops me is I feel like I'd be upset with just how, I don't know how I'm trying to end that, but like
No,
I've always really appreciated cops, and I know that you guys have such a hard job, and I just want to shed some light on it in any way that I can.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that story because, it's, I think if you look at, mass media, right, back to what you said earlier, there's this depiction that cops are all a bunch of trigger-happy people just waiting to kill somebody, right? And, like, no cop comes to work ever and says, man, I hope today's the day I get to shoot and kill someone, right? Just the opposite, right? You don't want to, that's something you live with for the rest of your life, right? I mean, you were in war, right? Some of those demons don't leave you, man, right? You may get them under control, right? But that's something you're going to live with for the rest of your life. And, the story you share, I would argue, probably happens around this country every day, right? I could tell you story upon story where my folks have been in situations where they were absolutely 100% justified to use deadly force, and they didn't, right? For a variety of reasons, right? Because they either used good tactics, or they had good cover, or they had the right other less lethal weapon, or whatever it may be, right? That's the last thing they want to do. And so, to hear your story, I think is important because it sheds some light to show the other side of that, right? And I think it's also important for people like me to hear that, hey, that made an impact, right? That was helpful to me, and now I'm here doing the things that I'm doing because of the decisions and choices that these officers made, right? And it's, and those are not, again, the stories that are going to lead right on, or maybe ever even be told, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only part of that story that's told is police take armed man into custody, right? Not police could have shot and killed him, right? Police just took him into custody, right? And and I think that's important to share those types of stories and for people to hear those, because it's so easy to just paint people into boxes, right, and put them in corners with, hey, this is how every cop is, and not at all. I mean, I served about, told you earlier, about 10 years on our tactical unit, our SWAT team, right, and in some challenging situations, right, and certainly in some situations where we would have been justified to use deadly force, but we didn't. And it's part of that is because you trust the folks on your team, right? And that each person has a role. They're going to do their role, and your role may be X, Y, or Z. Your role may be the guy that stands there on the bunker, right, and prays to God that nobody shoots at you, and prays to God if they do, it hits what's being covered by that. But knowing and trusting your fellow folks to do the right thing. And I'm sure in that situation, 3 dudes, right, they all trusted each other and relied on each other to resolve that peacefully, right? That they were going to be able to use that less lethal, and know that if they had to transition to a deadly force, they could do that and would do that, but not how they want to go in there. So it's I appreciate you sharing the story, man.